Troy Miller is a great friend of this show. Troy is the president of the National Religious Broadcasters Association, nrb.org, if you'd like to know more. We attended their convention in Nashville and enjoyed it so much we're going to be going back in the new year. And we've gotten to know the NRB very, very well and their advocacy for people of faith in media. Grateful to be a part of that, a small part of that. I'll be leading a panel discussion there coming up in the, I guess, early spring, late winter, however you frame that. What's February? Anyway, Troy Miller's with us and has written a very important piece at Fox News that I wanted to call attention to as well, because given what we just talked about, Troy, and I welcome you in, the idea that there are evangelicals or people of faith that we read are thinking of sitting this election out. I talked a little about this on my newsletter Friday, Troy. You wrote about this. I'm glad you did. I cannot imagine, given what we just discussed with Gretchen Whitmer, the hostility that's coming, the historic persecution we know has happened, and what's likely coming for all of us of faith. How anyone of faith could sit out right now is beyond me. Good morning, Troy.
That was 7 million people that set out in the swing states.
Wow.
In the swing states in 2020. That would have, if those people would have showed up into the polls, that would have entirely changed the election process, because most of those campaigns, most of those elections were decided by just a few thousand or 10,000 of people. So they would have really decided. I think there's two things that really Christians have caused Christians to set out. One of them is there's been this emotional, manipulation by politicians and by the left, and unfortunately by a lot of left-leaning pastors and Christian leaders out there that have had this idea that politics and Christianity don't mix. And that is just bizarre to me, because why Christianity, who for thousands of years has gone into every culture and changed that culture for the better, and it's usually changed that culture in the way the culture is governed, okay, why today these liberal, progressive pastors and leaders, Christian leaders, are doing that, and that's because they're really all about, they're just elitists themselves, and they're about the populism of their own popularity with the elites on the left as well. And then the other one is not enough good pastors have clearly addressed the issues from their pulpit that we're facing in this country today. And so that's two big reasons why Christians set out in 2020. But, Chris, I can tell you, I don't think that's going to happen this year. I think Christians are fed up with it. We were talking earlier, I think before we got cut off, about Gretchen Whitmer, about her mocking of Catholics. We know that the FBI has been weaponized in the Justice Department against Christians. They've knocked on Catholic doors. They've intimidated Catholic pro-lifers. They have locked up evangelical pro-lifers. The FACE Act, which is meant to protect both pregnancy care centers and abortion centers, Planned Parenthood centers from violence, has been used against Christians almost over 100 times, and barely been used at all against those who attacked pregnancy care centers. And here's the really thing. Those attacks to pregnancy care centers were violent. They were actually burning buildings down, and yet the FBI hasn't pulled anybody in. And I think Christians are fed up with it.
Troy, I know you're not here in the capacity of being a spiritual leader. You're not here as a pastor. You're the president of the National Religious Broadcasters. So I ask this question through that prism, knowing that you're not really here to counsel people, from a pulpit per se. But when you hear people, I know you count yourself as pro-life. I count myself as pro-life. My pastor speaks passionately about life. I hope most church leaders do. I know most Catholic folks still have a message of pro-life, even if they lean left on other social issues. I have heard many people critical of Trump now who are pro-life say, well, now he basically sounds like he's offering nothing different than what the left does. Sounds like his official position on life is as watered down as many on the left, and that's not acceptable to me. What do you say in response to conservatives and pro-life folks that say Trump has moderated his stance on life and thus they feel they can't support him?
So here's the issue, the pro-life issue that I think we have to remember on the pro-life side. First of all, what Trump did in his first administration was change the makeup of the Supreme Court, which gave us the Dobbs decision, which struck down the federal law ruling that was really over all the states' heads. So he pushed it back to a state's issue right now. We have a dozen states that have pro-abortion legislation that'll be on the ballot. That's where the fight's at. The fight's not in the presidency anymore. The fight is at the state level where Trump promised to put it. And here's the second thing. The fight is well beyond Roe versus Roe v. Wade, because Roe v. Wade allowed for restrictions based on the various trimesters that a woman was in. So there were restrictions already allowed by the states under Roe v. Wade. That's not what the Democrats want today. The Democrats want to go way beyond Roe v. Wade. They keep talking about we're going to go back to Roe v. Wade, but they want to go way beyond Roe v. Wade, all the way up to being able to terminate the life of a child minutes before it could be born. Minutes before it was born, the mom could decide that for whatever reason, for emotional reasons, her health is at jeopardy and she can have an abortion. That's what was passed in Minnesota and some of these other states around the country. So that's where the fight is today. The fight is not in the White House. The fight is with the states right now, and that's what we have to remember on the pro-life, those of us who are fighting this pro-life battle.
Troy Miller, president of the National Religious Broadcasters. It occurs to me when you really back away from it that those on the left have a policy of exterminating life in the womb, and if life should exist outside the womb, they want to get to children as early as possible and start to convince them perhaps that their gender is malleable. They want to start monkeying around with hormone replacements and surgeries, and these children's hospitals are doing this pit of hell stuff now on minor children. It's the stuff of darkness, Troy, that I can't even get my mind wrapped around. This desire, this almost lust to extinguish life, and if they can't extinguish it, inexorably alter it through medicine. I don't even know how to describe it. It's so wicked.
Well, it's wicked, evil is exactly right. It's perversion with no limits. They want murder with no limits. Now they want perversion with no limits. Who would have thought that when we got into this fight, when we started into politics in the 80s, we were, talking about marriage between a man and a woman. Now we're talking about mutilation of middle schoolers, and something that they'll never recover from. They'll never recover from. There's some great stories out there of some of these kids who became young adults and figured out that, wow, this is not what I really wanted to do, and everybody pushed it, and now I'm never going to recover from that. Young women who are never going to have children, and now they realize that was just a phase, a fad in their life. We restrict all these things that kids can't do, and all of a sudden we say if a kid wants to change his gender, it's absolutely crazy, Chris, what's going on in the culture today. And it's a deeper issue of the spiritual battle that's going on. It goes back to why Christians need to get out and vote, because you're going to elect not a pastor-in-chief. You're going to elect a person who is going to govern the nation. This is a person who's going to decide the policies that drive the nation. They're going to decide the legislation that gets passed for the country. They're going to decide how the money gets spent, and they're going to appoint nearly 5,000 people that actually run the government, the people that really run the government. And wouldn't you want those people to hold the same worldview that you do, to hold the same set of morals and values that you hold? Or are you just going to give up and say, we're going to let anybody run this country, any kind of pagans, these evil, moral people? That's why it is so important for people to get to the polls today.
It occurs to me, and I really have to gently admonish a lot of people of faith when they say things like, Trump's not enough this for me, or enough that for me, or I need Trump to do more on this front for me. Respectfully, I think that's a bit lazy. I don't think we're called to elect a president to right all the moral wrongs across the country. I think that's on us. I think that's on our churches. I think that's in our communities. And quite frankly, I think a lot of local churches have abdicated their responsibility and tried to push off those responsibilities onto government as opposed to take it upon themselves. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I do. I absolutely agree with that. And look, I'll go a step further. A lot of parents have done that as well by advocating the responsibility to our school systems when it's just never been that way. And I think that's, again, we're seeing this big pushback in the country right now because if you look at the school choice movement that's going on throughout the states here, they have been winning battle after battle after battle for school choice. And the same thing. Look, the problem lies in too many of the pastors, too many of the pulpits today not shepherding their flocks in the things that are important to their flocks. And again, they're too worried about, if I get into politics, I'm going to upset people. People aren't going to like me. People are not going to be happy. You know, for 175 years of this country, all the way back to the Black Robe Regiment, pastors were the ones that drove the social issues. They talked about what was important for people, not only in their faith and how they act out their faith within the walls of their church, but how they do it within the public square and the public sector. And we drove things like the Christians created more hospitals go across this country. Every hospital has some sort of Christian name to it: Mercy, Grace, St. Andrews, St. Peter's. You know, all across this country, you have Protestants and Catholics that drove education, all of these cultural issues. And suddenly today, pastors are afraid to stand up and take a risk and really guide their congregations in the things that are important to make a society moral and to have the values of life, the values of liberty, and the values of freedom. And that needs to change.
Troy, just briefly while I have you, nrb.org, the website, NRB, National Religious Broadcasters, nrb.org. If people are interested, that's coming up in February, I believe, the next convention down there in the Dallas area. We'll be headed back down there again, and I'm really thrilled to be a part of it. If people do not know about your organization or might be interested, you don't necessarily have to be in communications to attend. Is that right?
That's right. But you think about it today, Chris, everybody's in communications. If you have a Facebook page and you're out communicating with your family and your friends, you're in Christian communications today because those are the mediums that people are using to get their information. So we'll be February 24th through the 27th in Grapevine, Texas at the Texas Gaylord Hotel. You can find out more about it at nrb.org. You can also follow me, Chris, on all the issues that we're covering on X at NRBCEO.
At NRB CEO. We will continue to, Troy Miller. And the piece at Fox News, this group has the numbers to decide the U.S. presidency if they turn out. If, capital IF, if they do. And I can't imagine why it's an if, but maybe it's still an if. And so we've got to work hard. All of our brothers and sisters of faith in Christ, sideline sitting is certainly not acceptable right now. Troy, thanks a lot for your time today.